With healthcare legislation firmly in the loss column, Republicans are ready to turn the page to their next agenda item, tax reform. The Trump White House plans to take a key role in crafting this major legislation, which could be finalized by late summer. But with lingering division from the push to pass healthcare, getting the entire party on the same page could prove difficult in the coming months. I want to bring in Akash Chougule, who is in the CBS News Washington Bureau. Akash is the Director of Policy at Americans for Prosperity, a conservative political advocacy organization. Akash, welcome.
Hi, Elaine. How are you?
Well, thank you. Your organization actively tried to fight the passage of the American Health Care Act, saying that the bill did not go far enough for conservatives. But with most of the Republican leadership behind this failed bill, do you get the sense, Akash, that this is going to be a long-term fight within the Republican Party?
We certainly hope so. I mean, President Trump and a lot of folks in leadership on Capitol Hill, they seem to have thrown in the towel on repealing Obamacare, but for the thousands of conservative activists who knocked on millions of doors, made millions of phone calls for the past 7 years, this is not the end of the fight to repeal Obamacare. We're hoping that they go back to the drawing board and do get this done at some point this year.
Well, the president has signaled that he's willing to work with Democrats, and I wonder what you make of that.
You know, we're open to working with anybody. At Americans for Prosperity, we're a nonpartisan organization. I think the opportunity was that they didn't need Democrat votes to repeal significant portions of Obamacare. That bill that they got to President Obama's desk in 2015 did not have any Democrat votes. President Obama obviously vetoed that. If Republicans were able to clean the slate with just Republican votes, of course we would be willing to work with Democrats to enact some of the pro-growth, free market health care reforms that likely would have bipartisan support, like buying insurance across state lines, making some Medicaid reforms, regulatory reforms. So we're willing to work with anybody, but you know, we are a little bit disappointed that Republicans didn't make the most of the opportunity that was put before them.
And on that point, Akash, I want to play a bit of sound from an interview I did a few weeks ago with Americans for Prosperity President Tim Phillips. I asked him what would happen if Republicans were unsuccessful in passing new health care legislation. Here's what he had to say.
If they fail, if they don't repeal Obamacare, if they really whiff on that, I think that their majority will be a one-term majority. I do, because the American people heard their promises over and over on Obamacare repeal. And if they fail, I think that's the greatest danger for them, is simply failing to keep their word on Obamacare repeal.
All right, so if he's correct, how do conservatives implement their agenda beyond 2018?
That remains to be seen. I think it's still relatively early in the new Congress, and this was not the last gasp in our attempt to repeal Obamacare, nor for other conservatives on Capitol Hill. But I think what Tim said is correct. For 7 years, Republicans ran on a promise to repeal Obamacare when voters gave them the House in 2010, the Senate in 2014, the White House in 2016, and they owe it to the folks that put them there to fight to repeal Obamacare and get that done. And if they don't, then voters will understandably be skeptical and be upset when they go to the polls next year.
Well, with health care, though, being a failed piece of legislation, some Republicans, including the president, are now turning their attention to overhauling the tax code and tax reform. But after the division that we saw last week, do you think that the GOP can be cohesive enough to pass any new legislation on that front?
I do. I think there are enough folks on Capitol Hill who are principled and want to do what's right by the American people. Now, even with tax reform, there is a lot of broad agreement on the broad principles, like the need to cut the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world, the need to clean out some of the loopholes, carve-outs, and corporate welfare. These are priorities pretty much across the board. But then you have ideas like the border adjustment tax proposal that simply is a tax increase on consumers, shouldn't be part of the package. If we can eliminate some of those more controversial parts of the package that, you know, are not a good deal for American consumers, but then move forward with some of the big concepts like corporate tax reform, cleaning out the tax code from corporate welfare, I do think they can get that through this year.
But as you know, the border adjustment tax is something that Speaker Paul Ryan, has said he is obviously in support of. So if, in fact, a package, a piece of legislation comes together that includes the border adjustment tax, what will Americans for Prosperity do with respect to supporting or opposing that legislation?
We would oppose a package of tax reform that includes a border adjustment tax, but hopefully Speaker Ryan has learned and the White House has learned that they need to get more buy-in from conservatives, need to get more buy-in from their caucus, from outside groups and other stakeholders, and not make the same mistakes they made with healthcare, where they try to ram through a bill in just a few weeks with almost no outside input. So hopefully over the next few months, and what we're being careful of is not rushing the process. So hopefully over the next few months, they'll take the advice of groups like ours, take that part out of this tax reform package and advance one that the entire Republican Party and the entire conservative movement can really get behind.
And if, in fact, that border adjustment tax is, though, included, when you say that Americans for Prosperity would oppose such a package, does that mean that, like health care, there would be an active role in opposing that kind of legislation?
Yeah, absolutely. We're active on Capitol Hill every day. We have a great federal affairs team that's working with offices here on Capitol Hill. Our state teams all across the country are working with district offices. So we'll be working with members of Congress and their staffs, and at the same time educating constituents, educating voters about what's happening on Capitol Hill, who's sticking to their guns, fighting for conservative principles, tax cuts and principles of limited government, and who's simply shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic in a status quo that's simply not working.
All right, Akash Chougule, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.